Welcome back. Today we're talking about Pythagorean Theorem. Before we begin, I would like you to watch the Edpuzzle video on the Pythagoras story, and then after we do this video lesson, you're going to do IXL 8.R.1. Okay, so this is 1, and then you're going to do and then you're going to watch this video, and then this is 3. Okay, so make sure you do it in that order. Pythagorean Theorem. Before we begin, I just want to remind you, I want you to remember how we use square roots. So we're trying to find the square root of 98 here. Every calculator is a little bit different. Some of your calculators, we know the one at school, you're going to use the square root button and then put 98 and then hit enter. Your calculator, if you're using an iPhone, you turn it sideways. I think you have to turn it to get the square root key, and you hit 98, and then I think you hit the square root. So just play around with it to see, but you're definitely going to need that square root key, and you're going to need any calculator that has a square root button. Okay. The square root of 98 to the nearest tenth is 9.9. The square root of 250 to the nearest tenth is 15.8. The square root of 277 rounded to the nearest tenth is 17.0. And then finally, the square root of 243 to the nearest tenth is 15.6. So if you want to make sure that your calculator that you're doing it correctly, please check with your calculator to make sure that you get those same answers. All right, so when we talked about the Pythagorean theorem, when we talked about Pythagoras, toward the end, it was a great little story. I have no idea if it's true in any way. In fact, I think in the end they say that they have no idea what Pythagoras was like when he was a kid, but I think it's a great story to introduce what we're talking about. He did discover that connection between the legs and the hypotenuse of a right triangle. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to do is to understand when you're taking notes that a right triangle has 3 parts. Okay, the 2 sides that form the right angle are called the legs. And then the third side that doesn't touch the right angle is called the hypotenuse. And it's a fun word to say. It is not a fun word to spell. It's actually spelled just how it sounds, except, hypotenuse. So this is called the hypotenuse, and these 2 sides are called the legs. I also want you to know, because they didn't talk about this in the video, the hypotenuse is always the longest side. Okay? The legs are always the 2 shorter sides. The hypotenuse is always the longest side. And then the Pythagorean theorem states that in words. I love reading the definition because it sounds really more confusing than it is, but for any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs equals the square of the length of the hypotenuse. What it's saying is, if you take one leg and square it, and you take the other leg and square it, and you add those 2 numbers together, it will be the same as if you took the hypotenuse and squared it. Okay, so here is our formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That is a formula that you can take with you in your head for the rest of your life. You have to commit that one to memory. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. All right, so as an example here, we have a cable-stayed bridge in Ohio, between Ohio and Kentucky. This is 212 feet. This is 478 feet. It forms a right triangle with that longest cable stay. Okay, and if we want to know what length that cable is, we're going to use Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It doesn't matter which leg is A and which is B. That makes no difference at all. Okay? So we'll say 212 squared plus 478 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. Now you're going to do 212 squared and you're going to do 478 squared. So 221, wait, did I do this wrong? 212 squared, let me make sure that, oh yeah, I did it all wrong. Okay. I had all of these notes done, so that way I could just write it without using my calculator, but I used 221 by accident. So 212 squared is 44,944 plus 478 squared is 228,484, and the sum of those is going to equal c squared. We're going to then add those two numbers together. And the sum of these two numbers is 273,428 equals c squared. Now, this is where we have to say, well, wait a minute. That's not c, that's c squared. Well, if I told you 9 equals x squared, what does that mean? It means that x must equal 3, right? Because 3 times 3 equals 9. So what can we do to solve for x? In this case, we can use the square root. And that's where the warm-up question came in. If c squared equals that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the square root of both sides. And that's going to give me, again, there's going to be some rounding here, but 522.9 equals C. Because if I do 522.9 and I square it, it's going to equal 273,428. So that means that this longest side is about 522.9 feet. So let's practice a little bit with some smaller numbers. Okay, here we go. So we don't know the hypotenuse. So we start by writing a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Then here's one of the legs, 20 squared, plus the other leg, 21 squared, equals c squared. 20 squared is 400, plus 21 squared is 441, equals c squared. 400 plus 441 is 841, equals c squared. And this is now where you're going to, in order to solve for c, you're going to do the square root of both sides. And the square root of 841 is 29. So that means that it's 29, was it feet? Oh, just 29. They don't even give these lengths. So c equals 29, or the hypotenuse is 29. For this one, again, we're given the two legs. So we start with the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Doesn't matter if you did 12 squared plus 5 squared or you did 5 squared plus 12 squared. It's the same thing. 144 plus 25 equals c squared. 144 plus 25 is 169 equals c squared. And hopefully you recognize that from earlier in the year when we worked with square roots and squares, that what number times itself equals 169? The answer is 13. But again, if we didn't remember that, we could just do the square root of both sides and get c equals 13. Okay? And then finally, we'll go with this. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. 3 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. 9 plus 25 equals c squared. 9 plus 25 is 34 equals c squared. We do the square root to both sides, and we find that we're going to have to use some rounding here because it's a really long decimal. In fact, anytime you do the square root of a non-perfect square, you know it's irrational, which means it's never ending and never repeating. And so we get c is about 5.8. Now, at this point, I just want you to look back and look. Remember, the hypotenuse has to be the longest side. Was 29 the longest side? Yes, it was. For number 2, was 13 the longest side? Yes, it was. Barely, but it was. And was 5.8 the longest side? Yes, it was. And also, all of these conform to the triangle inequality theorem. 20 plus 21, the two smaller sides, is 41. That adds up to more than the longest side. For the second one, 5 plus 12 is 17. That adds to more than 13, so that's right. And then 5 plus 3 is 8. That adds to more than 5.8, so that's right. It's always good to use that as a check, just in case you accidentally divided by 2 instead of doing the square root, or something went wacky. It's always good to use those two things to just check to make sure that you got the right answer. All right? Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you see all my wonderful videos pop up on Sunday nights while you're eating dinner or whatever you're doing for the week. All right. I'll talk to you guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.